ahead and hop into it. I think game one is about to get loaded here between ShuiMoo and reqvam. And, actually, before we, talk a little bit about it, I do can't help but notice that you also, Sado, have picked a Chinese player and not a representative from Europe going into it. Were you dialed in at all into the Chinese meta or like the things that they would bring when you were like studying and preparing for this tournament?
I pay a little bit of attention, yeah. It's hard to, of course, because the scene is separated a little bit. But, I do tend to do my research. There are a few people that I can talk to who generally help me out with translation. And honestly, Lorinda is quite often a big help as well because he has done a not insignificant amount of coverage of the Chinese scene as well. So he usually helps me out with some little facts and tidbits as well. But, it's a scene that I am very interested in because I do think there was a very clear regenesis point for the Chinese scene where some of the old names that we've been seeing over and over again, like Trunks and ironically Omega Zero, who is now back with a vengeance, started to get replaced with this new wave of Chinese players, with Lee chief amongst them, who did end up being a lot more impressive. And I that was a big reason, along with the stats of him just being so insane in Masters tours with a 70% win rate, why I did end up going with the Chinese scene. But we'll get more into Lee again later on. We need to refocus here on ShuiMoo as he hits the Gnarg opening going second, which is one of the best ways in the matchup to compensate for going second, because just being on coin in this matchup is a pretty big disadvantage. So ShuiMoo can essentially use these 2 free weapon charges that he has now to reverse that initiative that he loses from going second in the matchup.
That's right, and it's up to reqvam to really stack what kind of advantages that he can get early on, as he does lead off with what looks like to be his second athletic studies here. Now, a lot of people look at cards like Dr. Krasnov, their eyes aren't glowing with the kind of value they can get. It doesn't seem like it has a lot of application with no weapons in the hand right now, so I feel like reqvam agrees here and says, hey, I'm just going to take something that's a little bit more guaranteed. Finds the second Overlord Runthok. Okay. Pretty nice.
It is a very juicy looking hand now, and it does make this parade leader quite terrifying, I would say, on ShuiMoo's side, because normally you feel like it's fairly safe on curve. There are very few cards that interact with it, but with double athletic studies buff, yeah, I think this is the exact reasoning, right? Is that he's understanding what double athletic studies buff means here and how it could mean a highly impactful 5-drop coming down on this turn like Overlord Runthak. He's just not giving the targets to be rushed into on this turn.
Yeah, there's some interesting mechanics that's being introduced into Hearthstone slowly over time, which is kind of the inverse of overload, which is like preloading your mana in a way, just having your investment of your mana early so you can bank it and then transfer it later. And Overlord Runthok, I mean, we've talked about why it's good a couple times. I mean, it's pretty obvious in this matchup in particular when you're going first, which is getting that stat hand buff to be able to get yourself that board tempo very fast and overwhelm your opponent. And ShuiMoo, on the other side, is now trying to do the same thing.
Broom? Heard you advocating for Broom earlier. I think it is an underrated card, even in Rush Warrior. I think it seems counterintuitive at first, but when you start to break down the amount of minions that don't have Rush that you can give Rush to, I do think it's quite an interesting choice. And right here, it does allow ShuiMoo to run out that Laughing Sister straight away and actually deal with the Runthak on the other side of the board, which I think is pretty nice.
Yes, absolutely. And, just a good way to get that board that you were talking about, which is going to be trickier when you're going second, but all of a sudden ShuiMoo playing some kind of like impromptu rogue style against the reqvam's Rush Warrior.
Oh, and that's the nuts pull off the Naralex as well. I think based on the start he had, he's hit the absolute dream, right? He just hit the curve of minions, cheap minion into expensive minion. He just got to play them out on turns 3 and turns 4. This is why I think there's such polarizing opinions on this card, because the difference between hitting what ShuiMoo did here with the minion into minion, and instead he could have just hit like Nightmare plus Dream, right, which wouldn't have actually been that impactful. Instead, he picks up the perfect minion curve to pressure the opponent, but obviously the inverse of that can be true as well. So the range of cards that you can get from a random Dream card is so huge that this card does seem very feast or famine on certain occasions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in tournament environments, that's really scary to be on the opposite side of, because we've also seen the bad side of things like the Venomous Scorpion Rush Warrior, where it offered you really bad stuff, just to say the least. It just didn't, there's only one choice at best in a lot of those cases. But sometimes it just gives you the nuts. And in those kinds of tournament environments, it's super hard to account for all that.
Right. Yeah, I gave up on Scorpion Warrior a long time ago. I think it has some application in Control Warrior, but like you play it and you get like 2 taunt synergy cards and a sword and board, right? And you're like, well, what are these cards? I'm not interested in any of this.
Yeah, I am in agreement with you, but it does seem like that is the Chinese flavor in particular with their Rush Warrior builds. On the other side too, reqvam, he has had anything but easy turns, it feels like. Going for a conditioning on 4, which is quite unusual, but it could be the nod to the fact he'd already played a Runthok that he couldn't collect value from, and just feels like the game is very quickly going to slip out of his fingertips if he's not trying to fight for that board. Plus, he does have that second one ready to go if he needs it on the next turn.
I think reqvam already gave the wry smile over to his opponent there because he's seen which card ShuiMoo has picked up this turn, and he knows it's the one that came from the Naralex. So I think reqvam is already starting to suspect that he did hit the 7-6 here as well, which is obviously worst case scenario for him. There you go, he's going to get the confirmation. Yep, shake of the head, roll of the eyes.
Yeah. Does have the answer in the form of a parade leader, but that's not the position you want to be in, which is utilizing these cards just to be responsive. Uh-oh. Little match pause here, waiting to reconnect. It does seem like we had reqvam's webcam working, so this might actually be on ShuiMoo's side. It would be quite unfortunate. We did have a disconnect earlier today with Okajinsuke, where his internet or PC, actually his entire group, collectively decided to start a detective hunt onto what exactly was the culprit. They're like, what is your PC specs? Show me your speed upload. And it was the problem. And they couldn't figure it out. They said, I think half the group believes it was some of the components of the PC and others believe it was a bad internet. Either way, I hope that's not what's happening here with ShuiMoo because, China does have that firewall and it's going to be tricky sometimes if the internet issues do persist.
Yeah, hopefully he can get back into proceedings as soon as possible. But unfortunately, it's kind of been a theme throughout. We've talked about some of the pluses and some of the minuses, of course, of these events generally being online now. Positives being we get to see a lot of these players from the Chinese region in the first place who generally aren't able to travel and compete in a lot of these tournaments. They get to play them in very happy time zones for them as well, which, the APAC time zone that this tournament is technically operating on is better for the Chinese players than it is for the Europeans, for example. But there are, of course, negatives where technology being the vehicle of esports, and sometimes that vehicle crashes, burning a flame into a wall, Daniel.
That's right, and sometimes it even bleeds over to caster audio, as both Sottle and I.
Oh, come on! It's been an entire year, Dan. I've been perfect. I don't know what you mean.
You've been solid. I still have had issues at time to time, but I guess that's also just part of my brand in Hearthstone at this point, which is audio issues galore. But it looks like we're back in. ShuiMoo has not disconnected, thankfully, and is going to respond to this Emerald Drake. But it is just a clear landing zone for ShuiMoo to develop as much as he would like going into a pivotal turn 5.
Yeah, and he has the conditioning, crucially, to follow all of this up as well. So, dealer's choice, really. Pick your poison. The Rakara looks incredibly appealing here because it just straight for one trades after the buff over the 3-4 on the other side of the board, and then boom, with the 2 minions attacking face, picking up the buff. Yep, reqvam shakes the head. This is it. It's just the perfect curve. It's what it is. And the perfect curve has come from Naralex as well, which has made it even more tilting in the end. It's really, really hard to fight back against this from the other side.
It does not look like the script writers have changed anything about the fate of any player that's not from China in this top 8 right now. As momentum, this would be the 10th straight game that China has won in a row if you pool all of the Chinese flags together of the representatives, which would just be astounding. 3-0s from quarterfinal 2 all the way to quarterfinal 4. Going now into semifinal 1, and I don't see the way reqvam can easily snap that back. He does have a couple of tools at his disposal. Buffing all these small little Dark Moon Rider rushers with the Overlord Runthok does help, but it doesn't really stop the overarching big problem is that he is losing on board pretty badly.
Yes. Catastrophically so, and the problem is going to become twofold later when, even if he is able to recover this board eventually, like maybe through some combination of Run Thack and Troublemaker, he gets a grip on the board, he's going to do so with somewhere between 5 and 10 health, right, at best, and there's still the Alexstrasza already drawn in ShuiMoo's hand to be able to finish the game out at that point. So it's going to be really, really difficult for reqvam to find enough time even this game to climb back into this one.
ShuiMoo picks up Bumper Car, just more fuel to add to the board state with the Parade Leader to buff them up as well. Like, also just go stage diving first as well. Maybe figuring out a more powerful play to just slam onto the board and continue to overwhelm reqvam.
Oh. I was going to say I quite liked just playing out Bumper Cars there without the Parade Leader, because he still had enough attack thanks to the conditioning buff to be able to trade over, and it also left him less all-in against like Blademaster Samuro, for example. It would mean that Blademaster Samuro would still clear his board, but it would fill his hand up with 1/1s that he could then use with Parade Leader to still make an impactful board to follow up. All of that analysis was pointless because he just ripped the nuts off the stage dive instead and just had a much better play without really having to think too hard about anything.
Oh my goodness gracious. That's a playmaker as well to summon additional Bumper Cars with big stats. Could combo with the Parade Leader as well. So it's either the 2 Bumper Cars or it's the Parade Leader Bumper Car, because the second one that you do summon gets the additional stat buff as well. And we are coming up on those Troublemaker turns. Either way, I like any possible combination of the cards. reqvam is devastated. Just look at him cock the head back. He is not happy.
I'm sorry. I know I'm like just laughing at a person's misery here. Like I'm experiencing deep schadenfreude, but Hearthstone is just a wonderful game when it happens to other people, Dan. It's just you get to sit back and spectate from the sidelines. It's so much better.
Oh yeah, you and tens of thousands of other people daily on streaming sites agree.
That's right. Yep.
Yep. And reqvam has Troublemaker here, which at best clears off 2 minions. That's assuming you get to direct the attacks of the Ruffians. This is a bad spot that's continuing to degrade for reqvam here. There's not much else you can do.
Nope. No other real play. Just has to play the Troublemaker. What? Oh, he's dead. He's dead. He has to be dead. He has to be dead. I'm not even going to count. You never count.
It does feel like it with the ETC guy metal and the rushers, and if reqvam doesn't take lethal damage, he might just concede for the mental preservation. As you can see that even reqvam, who has been in, distraught in agony this entire game so far, even throughout a couple chuckles throughout the past couple turns, because sometimes you just get got. And that's game number 1 victory for ShuiMoo, his 4th consecutive of today, the 10th in a row for a Chinese player. Can anybody stop him, Zottel?
Yeah, the first time you said that, I was like, wait, is that true? And just like went and looked at the bracket. Yeah, you're absolutely right. 3-0 for ShuiMoo, 3-0 for Lee, and then 3-0 for Omega Zero, followed up now by the 1-0 for ShuiMoo. That is 10 games in a row for the Chinese region. And that was just an incredible beating by the hands of ShuiMoo. It reminds me of a particular game we had in Europe Grandmasters, which I believe was Boston piloting Mage, and it was one of those games where like Deck of Lunacy just did all the perfect things that Deck of Lunacy could do in a row, culminating with an Aegwin buff ending up on a Zixor Prime that had been shuffled into his deck from a different 5-drop that had been summoned. So therefore, the Zixor Prime gave +8 spell damage because it duplicated the Aegwin effect multiple times. Just anything that could possibly go right went right for Boston in that game, and there was a very similar story for ShuiMoo in that one.
Deceptively simple, insanely fun. Yeah, that's our stuff.
Yes.
ShuiMoo has OTK Demon Hunter. I mean, insanely fun sometimes for one player, but the other player on the receiving end, I guess you can't really do anything but laugh in those scenarios, Zottel.
Nope.
OTK Demon Hunter up on deck here, as the tech card choice is the Acidic Swamp Ooze, as we've discussed a few times. It does feel like ShuiMoo is favoring the more reasonable middle of the line, as some players decide to put double Ooze in their deck because that's how badly they wanted to include Weapon Hate. But I like this. It's much more balanced, and it does feel like OTK Demon Hunter has very much shown that it is one of the top decks in the metagame and not just this narrow pet deck that a lot of people who specialize in the deck want to bring. And overall, I think we're better for it because it's been a long time since we've seen a reliable combo deck be more than just a tech deck of choice for a tournament.
Yeah, people complain about how obnoxious and how powerful the actual combo part of OTK Demon Hunter is. Like, obviously it has weaknesses, as all combo decks do, but the ability to like deal 72, 96 damage on turn 7, turn 8 sometimes, right? The ability to deal 36 on turn 5 potentially with particular draws. Like, it seems ridiculous, but I think the way you break it down there is really interesting because that's kind of how good a combo deck needs to be in Hearthstone right now, with all the combo disruption that's available on the other side to deal with it, right? So it's a testament to just how powerful those combos can be from OTK Demon Hunter that it's managed to stand the test of time. ShuiMoo here, obviously keeping that skull second from the left with a very easily usable card, blocking it from outcast positions. That'll likely be an on-curve skull. His version of the deck, a little bit old school at this point, it's even worth saying, with double Spectral Sight. I've been banging the drum of some people going 1 Spectral Sight, 1 Acrobatics, which I hate. Those cards are far too similar to be playing 1 and 1. I think you need to set out your stall and pick one of them. But I feel like up until quite recently, no one had gone full Acrobatics and actually put 2 of them in the deck, but it's been quite common during this tournament. And the stats actually come down in favor of the Acrobatics players, where the Acrobatics version of the deck has had a slight edge in win rate in this tournament over the Spectral Sight version of the deck, which I would not have expected to happen, but I'm kind of happy to see it.
Yeah, I think that's great. The fact that we're able to even find those small innovations and debate about that card draw. And I mean, how many times has Spectral Sight felt kind of underwhelming in those situations? It does make sense anecdotally from my perspective, and I'm glad that the data actually lines up with there. So really interesting topic you brought up. ShuiMoo just picked up the second Skull of Gul'dan. So in terms of card draw, he is set. Can he handle the pressure of the Rush Warrior? reqvam just eagerly anticipating to see what's going to be waiting his fate. But more importantly, it's not about what ShuiMoo does, it's more, does he have anything to do on turn 2?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he'll be bothered too much. Like, there will be a minion that comes down before he needs to play that skull, right? So the I-beams will get cast. And as you mentioned, he drew the second skull, but then if you scan across left to right between the first skull and the second, all of those cards he is perfectly happy to play as well. So this will be 2 outcast skulls in very rapid succession, I think, here, if ShuiMoo plays this hand outright.
Yep. So that makes a lot of sense. But for now, just biding his time. No rush on having to play cards like the I-Beam too early, understanding that reqvam is just getting started and rolling. Possibly can't be understated by how nice that Crab Rider is to set up for reqvam's board. Could play the Warmaul Challenger in this spot and get the Rakara buffs really rolling. Warmaul Challenger is a very hard card for the OTK Demon Hunter to remove because they don't have any cards that straight up say destroy a minion. It's pretty much just accumulating a lot of damage and multiplying it.
Smart pick. It's a smart play from reqvam here, I think. I think you saw him just going through a little bit of process of elimination just with his finger gestures there, which is kind of interesting because ShuiMoo kept 2 cards on the left, right? And I think that's probably what reqvam was addressing as to what those cards were, because with 2 cards being kept, it's either Skull just straight up being kept far left, or it's Skull or something playable being kept on the far left as well, right? And because it hasn't been played yet, he's ruling out things like Double Jump, Illidari Studies, all of that kind of stuff, right? And then I think that puts him on keeps like Chaos Strike, I-Beam, those kind of things, like easily usable cards in that position, which ended up taking reqvam away from the Rakara that he has in hand and goes with the Warmaul Challenger instead. And again, you just see Rakara being floated here completely. Hard pass from reqvam, I think, based on a very clear read of what ShuiMoo's hand looks like. And it's a great read, Dan.
Yes, I like it a lot. And this is something that I feel like has been just very impressive from reqvam. Very solid understanding of what he needs to do, but more importantly, I feel like he's been identifying proper reads and picking good timing windows, and that's the key to disrupting this Demon Hunter, even if you don't have a card that deliberately states on the card text saying that you disrupt your opponent. Having this timing window is just as effective sometimes.
He saw the reaction. He's got his reward, right? He got I-Beam used because ShuiMoo has to use it because he wants to coin Skull next turn. So by being patient and waiting it out, you saw the reaction. You saw the nod come out from reqvam. He's won a very small, and it might look inconsequential, battle, like game of chicken between the two players there. But I think it's a really big deal because now he gets to play this big power turn with the Rakara into a turn that disrupts the Skull instead of into a turn in the early game where it would have just got smacked by an I-Beam.
And now ShuiMoo has to figure out if this Skull is going to be worth the punishment, because there's a lot of damage being faced towards him right now with the weapon and all this on the board. And remember, they get stronger with the Rakara staying on the board too. So if you end up going for a Skull and you can't remove that Rakara, it's going to hurt a lot.
It is. At the same time, Skull is Skull. He does have a talented Arcanist in hand, so if he's able to get his hands on Immolation Aura, he should be feeling pretty confident. That's not ideal. Hang on, no, that's incredible. I was going to say that's not ideal, but then rapidly changed my mind as the third card appeared. And now that is Philosophy on a 0-mana Moarg with the addition of Talented Arcanist, 2 Moargs coming down for 0 mana, Il'gynoth, and the Fellscream Blast down.
How much damage is that next turn?
Enough.
Yeah. Because the I-Beam is there too.
That's the I-Beam and the weapon as well, yeah.
I know. And reqvam doesn't know what's coming towards him. I don't even know why we bothered pretending like anyone had a chance to stop this Chinese onslaught. Complete and utter domination. Now, from reqvam's point of view, you don't see this, right? And you saw no cards being played. And I guess from his point of view, he's trying to figure out, how can I even best optimize? Is it continuing to load the board with his best possible minion? He agrees. And he's in for some rough news.
Yeah, he's in for a surprise. The fact that this is happening on turn 6 without a 1-mana Il'gynoth is probably the most tilting part of this. And yeah, reqvam raises his eyebrows. He gives the smile. The smile breaks into a genuine laugh in the end. And that, I believe, is going to be 36 initial damage plus whatever else ShuiMoo wants to throw out here. So that is a disgusting turn 6 lethal, as I was talking about earlier. And it's a heartbreaker for reqvam because, like, I mean this very genuinely. I don't blow smoke up people. I think that was a really well-played game from reqvam, like, exceptionally so. Not to the level of, like, a good pro should play the game. I think it was a genuinely insightful game being played there from reqvam. Sometimes it just doesn't matter because sometimes your opponent deals 36 to you on turn 6.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why people are bringing in these kinds of decks. And I think that's what most players can agree, a requirement for every single deck in your lineup. Does it have an I-Win hand to be able to blow things out of the water? And OTK Demon Hunter is no exception. There's many decks that can do something like this. That is a qualification that it feels like in a Conquest lineup, especially in a situation where people are trying to target certain things. Turn 6 lethal, that was the fastest that I've seen this weekend from the OTK Demon Hunter. And ShuiMoo is now 1 game away from going to the Grand Finals. All he has to do is get this move with the Rogue.
Yep, Rogue has slightly underperformed, let's say, in the Masters Tour as a whole. Has played a little over 2,000 games at a 49% win rate. It's certainly not bad. Generally, when decks play that many games, it does tend to trend towards 50% quite a bit. But some of the matchups it's coming up against, it actually does okay. In the Demon Hunter matchup, it has been slightly favored over the course of the tour so far, which, of course, is a matchup that it has to come. It does have the Rush Warrior matchup to deal with on the other side, which, as we all keep saying, is a bad matchup, but not an unwinnable one. But, I mean, ShuiMoo's just in such a fantastic position where, with 3 attempts, even if he had 3 unfavorables, which he doesn't, he's still in a good spot to win the series. And honestly, we can forget about talking numbers. We can forget about talking percentages. Genuinely, it feels like the way this tournament is going, reqvam could have 3 100% matchups left remaining in his lineup, and he would still lose this series 3.
Yeah, at least that's kind of the pace at which we're going. I mean, it is. It's unlikely if reqvam just queues up the Warrior again, but I mean, we've also already seen a couple of upsets today of the Rogue over that Warrior. So let's have at it, as we do have the opening mulligans here from reqvam and ShuiMoo's side. And You know, I think in this kind of scenario, if you're reqvam, just gotta pretend like those two games didn't happen. It just felt like those weren't your games to win. As you were talking about, what can we do that's in our control? And he's gonna immediately throw back that conditioning and only hold on to the bumper car, which is interesting. You know, a lot of people talk about conditioning a lot, and a matchup like this, I guess reqvam doesn't value that card so.
And I kind of agree with him, yeah. I think one of the pitfalls I have seen people fall into is just playing a conventional Rush Warrior game against Rogue, which is something that Rogue can operate against. They can just go a little bit too quick for the standard, like, turn 5, get rolling kind of hand. I think generally just playing early minions for tempo and even just hitting run thack, for example, on turn 5 as opposed to playing a rank 2 conditioning on turn 5 can generally just be a little bit more powerful, a little bit more initially high tempo, make sure that you're not falling behind significantly. The matchup is still fine, it's still very good for Warrior because even in those situations I'm describing where you do fall behind to a much more high tempo opening from the Rogue, you still have recovery mechanisms like Playmaker plus Rush Minion or Blademaster Samuro, for example, to swing the board back. But I think generally plan A should be just to curve out nicely with minions like Bumper Car, Crab Rider, Rakara, etc. in the early game.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Oh, one turn late. Imprisoned Gunnar comes to the hand at 2. Although, sometimes no time like the present as well. And it does seem to be his clear best turn 2 play in this spot.
Care to make a wager, friend?
And we will be seeing the Foxy Wand Thief here. Underwhelming, to say the least.
Yeah, so a little bit of damage, a little bit of draw, decent amount of life, but it doesn't seem like Ice Barrier is that kind of life gain that you're looking for, especially when by the time life really matters, it feels like the game had already been set into a motion that you don't want to be spending 3 mana to gain that life. You'd rather be spending that 3 mana to win back the board so you don't get in a position where life matters.
I wonder.
This is tough right here, actually, from reqvam, because a lot of things don't seem to line up very cleanly. There's no easy snipe outside of the Rakara to the Wand Thief, and it doesn't seem exactly worth. And if you play the Bumper Car and the Stage Dive, you are kind of, you know, subjecting yourself to some value trades on the other side that the Rogue can continue to stack their advantage against you.
Yeah, can just take this kind of preemptive little value bump over the Wand Thief, though, and I also don't think it's the end of the world. Because reqvam got redealt the conditioning hand, just spending mana on the Bumper Card just to transition the Riders into his hand to eventually hit that buff is probably worth doing this turn over a pretty underwhelming Rakara.
Well, ShuiMoo just picks up the Cult Neophyte, not exactly a card that has high impact in this matchup in particular, so not exactly drawing the heat that he did in the previous game. He's immediately going to start going for the Secret Passage instead. All right. Okay, finds the Octobot as a possibility.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, looking principally for Octobot here, I am sure, because he is still at the stage of the game where Octobot's very likely to go off. You do get quite clear signals against Rush Warriors when they can deal with your Octobot. Generally, it comes from athletic studies or having enough mana to be able to play Parade Leader plus something more expensive than a Crab Rider, for example, because all the Rush minions that cost 2 have 1 attack natively, so they still aren't able to interact. But there is the one outer draw, the Tent Trasher, coming down with the Demon on board, discounting it down to 4, and that is a big, big pickup for reqvam. The first real piece of good fortune he has had this series so far, it's worth saying.
Yep, and that resulted in him sniping that Octobot. Did have other ways to deal with it, but this was the cleanest and most optimal one for him. And ShuiMoo is going to react by playing just some of the cards in his hand. Just got to get something out before the Jandis. But also, what do you part ways with? Because you do want to keep a couple of these cards so that you have the field contact reload. Using things like the Prize Plunderer would actively work against that. And it does seem like ShuiMoo finally will relent his initiative and give reqvam the board.
It almost feels like ShuiMoo changed his plan halfway through that turn. It looked like he was going to go for Shooting Star Prize Plunderer at first, but then diverted to this dagger line instead. I think realizing, as you said, he wants to keep some resources behind for that field contact turn. And also, even with Shooting Star, the Prize Plunderer doesn't line up perfectly to deal with the 10 Trasher on the other side. So he is going to start falling behind piece by piece here. He'll hope the Jandis can catch him up a little bit on the following turn, but it looks like it is going to fall into the pattern of one of those games that Rush Warrior does end up coming out ahead in.
Well, it got Neophyte into the turn 5 play. Very cute. Now, it's not going to really slow down reqvam that much. But every little bit does count when you're starting to factor in conditioning, and the Crab Rider comes out as a 5/7. These rushers aren't getting any easier to deal with, and now we're starting to see the momentum that reqvam's been trying since the very beginning of the series that he's been aiming for with this deck. And ShuiMoo coining out the Jandis needs something very big. I'm talking 2 Earth Elementals big in order to answer this board state.
And that is just not it. Does put the illusion on the Steward of Scrolls. He knows there are Dark Moon Riders on the other side to be able to challenge most of this anyway, but at least this way he has the full health taunt in the way protecting, but the breakpoints are still just incredibly clean, right, with the minions that he has in play already, plus the small rush tokens that ShuiMoo knows that reqvam has in hand.
I wonder.
Here for a good time?
Well, one rider goes in and trades, and now reqvam trying to figure out if he wanted to go for anything between the Sword Eater and the Rokara. Rokara looks very appealing from this perspective. To squeeze in with the Dark Moon Rider, get a lot of overtrades, and be able to keep that board very healthy. I think he's hesitating for, from his perspective, what is he really accounting for with this weight here, Sottle?
I mean, there's a lot of tiny things. We saw this turn played deliberately in the opposite order previously. There are a few considerations here as to what to trade with, but also the order in which you play your cards, right? Because of Vanessa Van Cleef on the other side as to which tool you would rather give to your opponent. I think in that point, reqvam went back and forth, and I think your initial instinct is to say, don't give my opponent Rokara because that's the good card. But actually in that spot, he ended up reversing it and did play Rokara last, because I think giving the more expensive minion over to ShuiMoo in this position, if there were a Vanessa Van Cleef, is actually the correct thing to do. Because I don't think ShuiMoo has any world where he can afford to spend 3 mana on a Rokara, right? So I think just getting the sequencing and mechanics right on those small little details were taking up the majority of the turn for reqvam, because the actual macro game plan of that turn was very straightforward, right? I don't think it was ever going to change.
Yep, that makes sense. And ShuiMoo has to start answering the board state. Does have the ability to bounce back the Prize Plunderer, answer everything, but it does come at a pretty hefty cost because he's using every single combo and Battlecry card in his hand to deal with the board state.
Yep. Oof, indeed. And even then, it's going to have to be double Plunderer on 1 minion here to be able to clear this up, leaving a 6/4 behind on the other side. Actually, I guess the 6/4 can be taken care of, so it just leaves a 6/2, my bad, remaining on the other side.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's a way to wipe and continue to press. Is that bait? Is it better to play Sword Eater?
I think it might be bait. I think against like the dream scenario hand that your opponent might have with a field contact pop-off, it might be better just to hold on to it, but it's such a tiny margin that I don't think I'm too bothered by it. And I guess actually, since you're killing both Prize Plunderers, I think the dream hand with field contact would have to involve Prize Plunderers being drawn in that spot anyway, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's the dagger. Finally, it does seem like the insane streak that ShuiMoo started by putting 3 wins in a row is going to come to an end, as he does not have anything to do besides play this field contact, and reqvam has a lethal setup here, or at least lethal possibility.
Yeah, and you take it, right? Because if you ship both face, then either both Troublemaker tokens do go face and you win the game, or one of them kills the field contact for you anyway. So there's zero risk in leaving the field contact up in that position. reqvam does miss it, but it's not a big deal by any means. He is well and truly in control of that game. And that is box number 1 checked on the comeback trail for Europe, for reqvam, for Croatia. It means that he now has to shut down Rogue 2 more times, I believe, with his own Demon Hunter and with the potential Rogue Mirror on the other side. But that was the best matchup for reqvam out of the 3 available. He has the Rogue, which is obviously the 50-50, and he has the Demon Hunter, which in my opinion is a very slight Rogue favourable, as is reflected by the stats in this tournament, in fact, where I believe Rogue has gone 51% overall against Demon Hunter. So the finest possible of margins, but I still think a good matchup for the Rogue overall.
You're in my school.
Yeah, and I think that, Rogue has more levers to turn as opposed to the Demon Hunter in that matchup. So I do think that ShuiMoo wouldn't be that uncomfortable with it when he has like the Cult Neophytes at his disposal to potentially have ways to interact with ShuiMoo's hand. And so from reqvam's point of view, I mean, the Rogue Mirror might just be your best odds. And based off the way things have been going, it doesn't feel like a very big vote of confidence. But hey, it got you this far. And overall, I mean, it's a solid deck list. There's nothing really to complain about. Standard list from what I can see.
Yeah, very standard. The only question that has really been asked in this tournament so far is 2 Org Merchant versus 1 Org Merchant, 1 Penflinger. ShuiMoo has the 1-1. I believe Gabby had the 1-1 as well, whereas reqvam has the double Org Merchant, which has been more common around on ladder and in tournaments for the last couple of weeks. But they are almost inconsequential differences. They're very, very similar cards in general. Rare with how few spells there are in Rogue that you do get, a massive amount of procs. Like, it's not prime Libram Paladin level of Penflinger, right? When you put that card in your deck, it's just a few extra procs that you get out of it every now and again. So not a huge different 29 card mirror, and the 1 card that is different is very similar between the 2 decks.
Yep, very much so. And, I mean, Miracle Rogue has just... I mean, this is a matchup that a lot of players reduce it down to just who gets the Octobot. But, I prefer the non-Octobot versions of the Rogue Mirrors because I do think it becomes quite intricate with how you plan. But also, I don't mind if both players get it, because then you get to see some ridiculous, wacky, volatile back-and-forth Hearthstone.
Honestly, my favorites are the games where both players just have like Octobot field contact Kazakus in their opening hand, right? And then like the game is just absolute nonsense back and forth for multiple turns. But I did wonder where you were going with that for a second, because it sounded for a minute like you're going to say, yeah, I prefer not drawing Octobot when I play Rogue. I just feel like I understand the deck better that way. I was like, wait, what?
No, it's just more that sometimes when you see the Octobots go off, it just becomes, like you said, just very explosive. It just feels a little degenerate to me sometimes, with just the fact that Rogue can draw 15 cards or so in a couple of turns, and then all of a sudden they're decked out by like turn 6 if they get the Octobots going off. It's pretty absurd.
And we have the degenerate options on the side of both players here, Dan. This is why you drag out your sentences for as long as possible to allow yourself to divert halfway through. Oh,
that's just strictly optimal. Oh my goodness, card draw as well with the Swindle pickup for reqvam.
It's not quite. No, it is, right? Yeah. Foxy, Swindle, Prize Planner. He just needs to get another option here, and he's going to snipe the opposing Octobot with the Prize Plunderer because of his existing discount. That's insane. It's worth it, right? He has to drop the Brain Freeze on one of his own minions, but I think it has to be worth it.
Feels like it is, solely because ShuiMoo has that much of a hand to discount, and you're able to get a very strong board presence. And I mean, if you Brain Freeze your own Octobot, you're not actually losing too much. You're losing an attack on a 1/3 and a Divine Shield that wasn't really that impactful.
Yeah, so he did miss 1 damage there, but that's not necessarily a mistake. That can be something that you do deliberately in that position. So freeze is defined as missing your next attack. So essentially in that position, by freezing first before attacking, you are electing to make that attack the one that you miss, and then you still have the ability to attack on the following turn. So it's not strictly wrong in that position. It might be an oversight, it might be deliberate, but you can't call it strictly wrong in that spot. But yes, we do have another little disconnect issue as we hit another very crucial moment of our series with the Octobots coming down. And it's a big advantage for sure for reqvam to have sniped the Octobot without discount on the other side. The problem is he's basically had to use every card in his opening hand in order to do that. So he's kind of all in, right? Like, you can see the position now. His entire advantage from getting that Octobot start is on the board. Like, it's just there to be dealt with. And he's going to need to trust the rest of his deck to be kind to him, or hope that this board sticks around for quite some time from this position.
And then from ShuiMoo's perspective, do you take that big HP loss to slowly get that resource advantage? Looks like he is going to elect into that, as opposed to using his brain freezes to win back the board, trying to find how much damage can he take that toes the line effectively. That secret passage draw for reqvam will be huge later down the road as well, to give him access to more resources, because that was the one thing that was the drawback to his play last turn.
Yeah, passage draw is fantastic, but this field contact turn is equally fantastic because now he has coin, field contact, brain freeze 1 minion, shadow step the Foxy Fraud, replay the Foxy Fraud, draw another card, and I was going to say brain freeze again on a different minion, but again, this is why you draw out your sentences, Frodan, so you can divert to the second prize plunderer off the top on the Mankrik for the massive board swing. Oh!
Oh, and he draws Ogre immediately!
Insta-wipe.
I mean, very appropriate, given how quickly Mankrik got played and died, and Ogre got summoned. It was just a story in 3 acts, Sottle.
Honestly, I think he needed that. I was ready to call it, to wrap it up. I was calling this body bag 3-1. China dominance completely. But that 3-7, that 3 extra damage even, just changes everything in this position. Oh, turns down the Wicked Stab on the field contact. Okay, does hit Prize Plunderer though. Very nice.
And he gets another Wicked Stab. And an efficient Octobot for the future turns. I mean, this is just an opportunity to play out the cards except for Wicked Stab here and clear off everything.
Right.
Discount from the Octobot, though. There's not that many cards remaining in the original hand for reqvam, so it's actually not nearly as high of an impact as it traditionally is, but still, every little bit matters in this spot, and Wicked Stab is totally something that you can pick up later on for the game-ending damage, and ShuiMoo is at 17. Another little pause here. Apologies, as it does seem like we're getting... it's almost like you're watching a stream, and right before the big climactic moments, the streamer decides to run an ad break. And before we end up finding out what happens, it does seem to have a little bit of like the free... No
Discover Audible and travel the world. Yeah, we're all well used to it at this point.
Hearthstone Esports is taking an ad break. So apologies there on a little bit of the stop-go motion, but man, what a big series of turns here for reqvam to keep up that pressure. And I'm reminded of that 3-7 being there, and I'm looking at ShuiMoo's hand, and outside that brain freeze is going to struggle to remove the Ogre on top of anything else that reqvam's able to put out.
Yeah, the Enraged Mankrik is such a big deal because it's allowing reqvam now to just continue to play for this tempo-based game plan. He has no chance in terms of resources. It felt like that field contact turn was going to shut him down on the other side because it ended his tempo push. But then the addition of a whole 3-7 and an extra 3 damage to face really allowed him to just, again, go with that secret passage. And he just played another high-tempo turn, right? Prize Plunderer, Shadow Step, Prize Plunderer. You were talking about the Octobot and how it's not super relevant in terms of discounts, which is spot on. But it is just another 1-4 on the board, which is surprisingly relevant in the position that reqvam finds himself in. And you can also see the conscious decision, right? sorry to cut you off, but I was kind of surprised when the secret passage started the turn, right? Because he risked not being able to deal with the field contact by not using the Wicked Stab on it immediately. But when you start realizing what reqvam thinks his win condition is at this point, which is tempo and damage, you start to understand why he was so greedy with the Wicked Stab, right? He wants to hold on to it. He doesn't want to throw it at a minion. He wants to throw it at face.
Yep, it makes sense there. Gets a little bit of pen flinger action and the edge it has over the copy of Guardian Og Merchant instead.
Right.
And ShuiMoo now has an opportunity to develop Mankrik as it goes into a pivotal turn 6. And I think ShuiMoo is evaluating, what am I going to do if Jandice comes out next turn? Or if they don't have Jandice, what can I do if he ends up stumbling a little bit? And what sets me up best for success for my own Jandice?
Yeah, it's the additional thought, right? If any minion that you play here does potentially offer an Octobot proc, like, does that ever end up being relevant for the opponent in this position? Answer being very possibly yes, because that's a field contact draw for reqvam with the Cold Neophyte in hand as well. He can really get rolling this turn. He needs runner. He needs this hand not to brick very quickly. Whoo, yes, that's the dream. Swindle off the top.
I mean, the miracle continues. And ShuiMoo has a lot to do. There's a his checklist has many things and many items that need addressing in terms of answering this board, stabilizing his life total, developing proactive tempo. But he can't really do it all unless he's willing to gamble it on a Jandice. And I just don't think he is at the moment.
Yeah, I was honestly kind of looking at gambling it on a Jandice. I evaluated the turn with the Penflinger, Prize Plunderer, so on, and didn't think it ended up being good enough. Although, okay, no, I had it miscounted by 1. I didn't think he was able to take care of the Mankrik, but he would have been able to. But he's actually even choosing not to and holding on to the Tenwu long term here for some potential longer term value, which is very interesting because now that leaves up 6 damage on the other side of the board, and against this hand with the Alexstrasza still threatening from reqvam, that might end up being a big deal.
That's right. reqvam's spells cost 1 more this turn, so Secret Passage a little bit clunkier. Wand Thief's Discover is going to be a little bit less versatile.
Muzzle their magic. Reqvams get free.
Goes for the Discover. Well, Flurry and Primordial Study is the cheap option. Flame Strike to find a way to potentially curve into an Alexstrasza play, but would limit his ability to develop behind it.
Choose soon.
Just going for the Flurry right here, right now, and keeping that freeze. I mean, at this point, it's just rushing your opponent down. If you can get your opponent down to that pivotal 9 life like he is at the moment, sets up Alexstrasza in 2 turns. Oh, does that change anything?
Seems
Too little, too late.
unlikely. Okay, Kazakus does present some interesting options, though. 1 mana Golem possibilities, maybe not this turn, but next turn. Like maybe the Jandice comes down here, you get Rush plus Taunt, or some kind of Raz deal, Raz plus spell damage to be able to clear up the board, and then you use Kazakus 1 mana Healing Golem on the next turn to try and rebound yourself out of range from Alexstrasza. Like, the outs are extremely niche at this point, but they do exist. Not with those options, they don't.
Nope, no taunts, no rushers, no lifesteal,
I give up.
no dice. ShuiMoo is dead. reqvam brings it back to the brink. Game number 5 is upon us. Rogue Mirror goes the way of the Croatian, and reqvam is 1 game away from being able to turn this around, stopping it at its tracks at 11 wins in a row for China, and being able to get that win on behalf of Europe and the rest of the globe from other regions. As at this point, reqvam is an honorary global citizen at this point.
Adopted by the rest of the world, who have no one left to cheer for reqvam is, flying the flag for many onlookers now, I'm sure. But yeah, I've been very, very impressed with him, honestly. Like, he's a name that I know. He's a person that I know hangs around with in High Legend. He's a player that I've played against a bunch in High Legend. He's a player that I see in various Discords and in stream chats, but he's never really a player that I've been able to, sit in the hot seat and just examine on a close level like I'm doing right now in this tournament. And he's honestly been very, very impressive, and it genuinely meant it in some of those games where he was getting blown out by the nut draws from ShuiMoo on the other side. I still think he was playing really great Hearthstone, even though the consequences of his decisions just weren't there. I still think he was doing everything that he possibly could to maximize his percentages. So been really, really impressed with his performance so far, and I think he's got every chance now of completing the reverse sweep. Again, in my opinion, I think he has one slight unfavorable matchup left with this OTK Demon Hunter going up against the Rogue, but he is in a much more comfortable position than he was just a matter of 45 minutes ago.
Yeah, it's funny how that works out. If you ask a lot of competitive players about the moments that stick out to them throughout their careers, you'd be surprised to hear what they pick out. I think one of the most famous examples in the eyes of a lot of fans of competitive Hearthstone is when you ask them about some of the most memorable plays that they witnessed. They think about the days of, for example, Tice versus Osaka in the 2015 World Championship with the Freeze Mage mirror. And I think those players would be first to tell you that that didn't stick out nearly as much in their mind, but it certainly did in the eyes of the fan. They talk about games exactly as you described, where they're like, I made this incredible read that I felt very, rewarded for, and it didn't work out. I lost the game. It was super one-sided, but boy, was that a good hell of a play. And I think a lot of players would tell you that exact same story, which is very humorous to me, but also something that's a little fun of disconnect between the fans and sometimes the players.
But we are going to now come down to everything on the line. The last remaining European representative has the Demon Hunter to run with, and he will now be hoping for one of those far left skull early turn 6, turn 7, 36 damage draws to come out from the Demon Hunter to get him over the line nice and quickly, because the longer this one drags on, I think the more the advantage does stretch over to the Rogue, because that disruption comes in with the Cult Neophyte, the Jandis starts to come down, the big golems from the Kazakus start to really have an impact on the game, and the Demon Hunter really just has to start scrapping for every point of health, right? So I think this one is going to come all the way down to the wire. I love seeing it come down to Demon Hunter versus Rogue, because I like this matchup a lot. I think a few of my favorite matchups in the game right now do involve Demon Hunter against Rogue and Token Druid specifically, so I think this should be a great way to wrap up our series.
I think so as well. And, perhaps an opportunity for reqvam to just get that vengeance like you were talking about from that turn 6. But more importantly, it just feels like he's really dialed in. For ShuiMoo, I do feel like he's had a couple of tricky turns. But overall, it does feel like his hands have been playing themselves, largely either because the right cards have fell into place or because he wasn't really given many options, because reqvam made some power plays. A case in example would be that Octobot shutting down a ton of his agency in that matchup just now. So let's hop into it. Game 5 is upon us. The winner of this goes to the grand finals of the Masters Tour Dalaran stop. And we'll find out if reqvam can do it with Skull already in optimal position. But it's not like ShuiMoo doesn't have some stuff and tricks up his sleeve.
What happened? We missed the whole game. There's just a skull on the far left and we didn't get to talk about it in the mulligan. This is insane. Octobot opening coming out from ShuiMoo. This one is going to be fireworks. The contents of this Skull of Gul'dan, again, could be matchup defining here, because that dynamic that I was talking about earlier, where this hand being so powerful for the Rogue that if Demon Hunter can't end the game quickly, they might just have to burn through too many resources with the Fellscreen Blast and I-Beams being used defensively to really secure lethal. So reqvam will be hoping to dodge the Il'gynoth for a few more draws and then hopefully find it off that Skull of Gul'dan later on. Oh, Blood Mage I-Beam!
That is a huge draw. I-Beam shutting down the Octobot, so the first activation doesn't get the discount. Now ShuiMoo just following the curve. No time to play the second Octobot, no time to slow it down. The choices were so fast, didn't really get a chance to quickly examine, but The point being is that ShuiMoo has that 5-mana golem. Looks like it's raw stats, raw power. Divine Shield's very tricky for the Demon Hunter to deal with.
Yeah, and the way that this is lining up now with ShuiMoo being on coin but not having used coin, and there being no Illidari studies discount landing on the Skull of Gul'dan on the other side, that means that he gets to play 10 damage worth of Golem with Divine Shield to potentially disrupt that Skull of Gul'dan on the other side. Quickest play you'll see all day, I'm sure. Yeah, boom, Golem, Divine Shield, summon a copy.
Oh, it's just piles upon piles of statistics. And reqvam has to just accept it. Skull of Gul'dan. What's it gonna pull?
Whoa. All right, 0-mana Moarg. It's not the Il'gynoth that I was talking about, but it's the next best thing. It's a good consolation prize, but that is the card now for ShuiMoo on his side as well. Between that, Shadow Step, any Tenwu he can get his hand on, second Shadow Step, that Cult Neophyte could end up representing a lot of disruption over the course of this game.
I wonder.
ShuiMoo has to kind of weigh if now is the time. Does he want to layer it? Could do it over a course of a couple of turns with the field contact. Shadow Step.
Really?
Okay.
All right.
One Thief now. We'll fill this out. See if we see the Shadow Step get used. It's so hard to know what to do with Cult Neophytes in this matchup, because even in this position, right, he's already had to make one decision as to whether he wanted to play Cult Neophyte or at all this turn. Now he has an additional decision about whether he wants to Shadow Step it, then a third decision as to whether he wants to replay the Cult Neophyte this turn or hold it for a following turn. But with the Shadow Step number 2 coming out, I think that decision just got a whole lot easier. He can just go for the triple beating here and just try and set up for immediate lethal.
Got Mask of Cthulhu on 7. He's got 17 damage on board. reqvam spells cost an additional 3.
Yeah, crucially because of the way
that still clear.
Yeah, right. Crucially, because cards hold on to negative discounts, the Immolation Aura only costs standard cost right now because it started the turn at -1 in terms of mana cost, and the game does track that. So it got then increased by 3 to the point where it only costs 2. So he is still able to play out Moarg, Arcanist, and Immolation Aura still in the same turn. The problem is still very much those Divine Shields on the other side, though. That's the big roadblock at the moment.
Right, so we would have to commit, what, the Aug Merchant or Hero Powering? Oh! That is not a pretty sight at all. Taking that extra damage. But combo pieces are still intact, still have the Moargs, but doesn't really have the Fellscream Blast or the Il'gynoth, so that does put him at least 2 draws away. ShuiMoo even has opportunities to potentially pick up exactly where he left off because he has the coin. And that Mask of Cthulhu puts reqvam down to just 5 hit points, and next turn he would die.
He's dead.
Warblades only puts him back down to 8. And I think that's just it. There's just nothing else he can do.
Hero Power was the best he could do. ShuiMoo put him on the outer to be able to pick up big healing with an I-Beam or a Fellscream Blast, but it just doesn't come to fruition. China is going to go marching on in the cruelest of fashions. They dangled the win in front of reqvam after crushing everyone else on Championship Sunday / Monday, depending on where you are in the world. But in the end, it is going to continue to be the clean sweep for China.
ShuiMoo advances to the grand finale, and that's going to be it for the rest of the world in the Hearthstone Masters Tour Dalaran. reqvam was the lone survivor that wasn't from China. But, you know, what a series. That ended up looking like it was just going to be a one-sided beating, but I thoroughly enjoyed that at the conclusion of China versus the world.
Yeah, it was great. And I think reqvam, you know, a lot of plaudits do have to go to the loser here. Obviously, congratulations to ShuiMoo. We will see him in the final. Of course, his story has not yet ended in this Masters Tour. But for reqvam, I think he does deserve his fair share of the plaudits because not only is he repping Europe in an incredibly tough region, he's the last remaining European representative in the tournament, the only one to make it through to the semi-final.